Hello, I'm Shotaro Tani from Nikkei Asia. It's no exaggeration to say Japanese politics have had a tumultuous year, and even for a Japanese like me, it has been challenging to keep track of everything. So what has happened? We've seen massive election losses for the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. We've seen the Prime Minister resign, a new Prime Minister take office. We've seen the rise of a right-wing populist party, collapse of a decades-old ruling coalition, followed by the rapid formation of a new one. US President Donald Trump visited Japan for the first time in 6 years, touting a new golden age of the alliance, which is now being tested by the heightened tensions between Japan and China. As we approach the end of the year, we want to give you a cheat sheet of sorts, a concise rundown of all that has happened so you can get up to speed, and a brief look at what awaits next year. With me to help do just that is Rintaro Nishimura, Senior Associate at the strategic advisory firm, the Asia Group. Rintaro, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off with a quick rundown of all that has happened in the past year or so. I think we need to go back all the way back to October 2024 to actually, talk about this phenomenon that's been happening in Japanese politics. That's when the ruling Liberal Democratic Party suffered a massive loss in the lower house elections. Can you just quickly explain why they suffered such a massive loss and the series of election losses that have come after that?
Yeah, so I think there are two major reasons why the ruling party lost in successive elections. Three, actually. But I think the first reason was the aftermath of the political scandal that hit the party in the latter part of the previous year. The LDP was embroiled in a political funding scandal that basically took on a life of its own in a way. And the party's response to that, not clamping down on political funding after the fact, did cause a lot of concern and a lot of frustration amongst the general public. And that clearly did hit them in the polls. And the second reason was the rise of populist parties like Sanseitou and also the more center-right Democratic Party for the People. These parties catered to the public in a better way than the LDP had during the election cycle. They went for a more nationalist sentiment, a feeling of the status quo was not exactly doing much for the people. And that sense really kind of gave the voters a sense of a new alternative that they could have to a very scandal-ridden party that had ruled for much of the post-war Japan history.
So all that culminated in the resignation of the then Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, and the LDP subsequently held a leadership election, which was won by the current Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi. And in the process, Komeito, a party that is backed by the lay Buddhist organization Soka Gakkai, left more than 2 decades old coalition with the LDP, and we've seen the Japan Innovation Party become a new partner to LDP. And as you mentioned, we also saw the rise of Sanseitou, a populist party who are touting stronger regulation on foreigners. So, Rintaro, what's behind all these changes in Japanese politics, and in particular the general right-leaning sentiment that has risen amongst the public, which has kind of contributed to Takaichi's rise within LDP and to becoming prime minister, as well as the rise of Sanseitou?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the point where the status quo parties like the LDP have not really done what the people have wanted them to do, especially on the economic front, where there's been a decades-long stagnation in the economy. People are feeling like their wages are not going up and that living costs are going up without much support from the government in the right places. The government tends to throw money at the people in terms of cash handouts and these blanket support mechanisms that aren't exactly targeted at the population that really is in need of financial help. And this sort of sentiment has definitely seeped through the population and has given rise to parties that have that tout for a Japan first sort of nationalist ideology that is bringing back the focus onto the people that are feeling neglected by parties like the LDP.
Yeah, I can see having come back to Japan just this March, I can really feel the increase in foreigners and how that generally tends to lead to a building of sentiment where foreigners are coming and taking over the jobs, and I can definitely vouch for the wages not rising as well. But Takaichi has been in the office for a month and a half now, and she still enjoys a really high approval rating, which is around 60 to 70% in the polls. How has she performed in the first few weeks in the office from a domestic politics point of view?
I think Takaichi really did try to come in and show that she was different from the previous Prime Minister Ishiba, really focusing on growth strategy as her central pillar in her government. And the fact that she is creating a Japan Growth Strategy Council and coming up with these policies to really focus on the domestic economic policy that has perhaps been lacking in clarity under successive prime ministers. I think that has definitely been a reason for a lot of support domestically.
I mean, on the diplomatic front, Takaichi has had a very busy few weeks in the office, but I think the highlights are Trump's visit and the recent escalating tensions with China. That came after Takaichi said Japan would be in a survival threatening situation if Taiwan was attacked. Both are kind of linked, but we'll start with Trump. Trump and Takaichi, as I said at the outset, touted a new golden age in their alliance. What did you make of Takaichi's diplomatic skills in her meeting with Trump, and do you think they actually formed a strong relationship, or was that all just for show?
I mean, I think that she came in strong, starting with back-to-back diplomatic engagements since she first took office, and Trump was kind of the culmination of that, or the centerpiece of that first diplomatic engagement. And she showed how different she was from the previous prime minister, and being energetic and being more forward-leaning in her engagements with Trump. I think the documents that came out of that meeting mostly focused, I think, on economic security with the prosperity and innovation, shipbuilding, and the tariff deal in terms of the specific projects that were coming out of that. I think those all are signals that this government is ready to move forward on things that had previously been discussed, but now this is the implementation phase. And I think it started off on a great note.
The fact that she's a protege of former Prime Minister Abe, who was assassinated a couple of years ago, that's obviously helped. Trump was a best mates with Abe, and I think Takaichi gifted Trump Abe's golf putter, if I'm not mistaken. But having said that, moving kind of on to the China issue as well, there were reports that Trump told Takaichi not to provoke China about Taiwan, something that was actually denied by the government. And the US is kind of staying very quiet on the whole situation, save for some posts on social media from the US ambassador to Japan. There was also a recent report from our sister publication, the FT, on how Japan is frustrated at the silence from the Trump administration. So, Rintaro, I'm sure you talk to a lot of politicians and policymakers. How are they viewing the situation with China, and are they looking at any US involvement down the road? How are they looking to diffuse the situation?
Well, clearly this was perhaps not planned in the way in which Takaichi's remarks were taken by Beijing, and then this escalation cycle has continued. And most recently with the radar incident, it's gone from more economic to now including military rifts, shall we say. And so in that sense, I don't know if this was a planned engagement or strategic kind of way of engaging with China. But clearly it's happened, and now the government is looking to try and at least have a conversation with Beijing to try and diffuse the situation. Beijing at the moment doesn't seem interested in having that conversation. They've been at all levels of government, from the ambassador in Japan and also to the foreign ministry level. They've been going on basically a social media campaign criticizing Takaichi for her statement, threatening in a way to rain fire down on Japan if Japan were ever to get involved in an armed conflict over Taiwan. So clearly those signs are not good for Japan. And I think that Tokyo wanted Washington to be a little bit more forthcoming in their support for Japan's position. But at the same time, I think that the U.S. government is now focused on Trump's visit to to Beijing for the summit with Xi Jinping next year. And so the U.S. side probably doesn't want to get involved in a direct conflict between Japan and China. And so that's probably why there's not much of an open kind of commitment to supporting Japan. Although I would say the State Department spokesperson did mention today that the U.S.-Japan alliance is very important, and that China's position on Taiwan, or the current kind of actions being taken, are not conducive to peace and security in the region. So there are signs that there's a slight sort of increase in the engagement that Washington is willing to make. But I think that in the overall strategic context that the U.S. is currently in, there's not much of a, I think, incentive at this point in time to be going all in on supporting Japan. And I think that the hope is that Japan can deal with this on their own bilaterally. And I'm sure that the Japanese government will continue to seek that diplomatic breakthrough despite the current issues that they're facing.
So that was the look back, a quick look back at what has happened this year. Let's cast our eyes to 2026. One question that I want to ask specifically is the rumors of a snap election, which just won't go away. The reason being that it's better to hold one when Takaichi enjoys a high approval rating. Will we see a snap election next year?
I mean, certainly it seems like there are signs of that. We've seen recently that the LDP is rushing to fill in vacancies in their candidacies for the lower house, which is usually a sign that they're getting ready for an election. I don't know if that means it's going to happen immediately in January, or if whether they're going to wait until after the budget for next year is passed in March. But I think that it's better late it's better to do it earlier than never. We've seen with Kishida, where he had a very high approval rating after the G7 summit in 2023, and he stalled on holding an election, and he ended up leaving office a year after that. And so in that sense, there's no certainty that Takaichi's approval will continue to be high going forward. So there definitely will be rumblings that this is the best time in the next few months, in the early part of the year, to call that election.
I think there's a clear distinction between Takaichi's high approval not really correlating with the LDP's approval ratings, right? So how would that work to work in Takaichi's decision when she does decide to call a snap election?
I think recent polls have been showing that there's been a creeping effect, and there's a bit of a slight increase in LDP approval. But like you said, all in all, it doesn't seem like Takaichi's approval means that the LDP is overwhelmingly supported by the public. So that will give pause to that thought of rushing into an election. But at the same time, given how things are going in domestic politics, when we look at what's happening in the Diet right now, the bills that the LDP wants to push with Ishin, the Japan Innovation Party, those are not really going well in terms of steady progress. And there's only a week left in this Diet session to pass the bill to reduce the number of Diet members, the corporate political donations, and the supplementary budget. And that's not a lot of time for those three key bills and budget to be passed. And if those are going to be a cause for concern for cooperation going forward, then there's no guarantee, again, that down the line that this cooperation will get any better. As a matter of fact, Ishin may threaten to leave the coalition. And the fact that Komeito is not part of the ruling coalition means they've already lost some of that electoral benefit that they would have gotten with Komeito on board. So all in all, there's a lot of factors to consider. But at the moment, it seems that calling election early is still a viable option given those concerns down the line.
And you mentioned the partnership with Japan Innovation Party. Do you think that will hold, or will we see Komeito come back into the fold?
All indications at the moment, at least on the Komeito side, is that they're not interested in joining the coalition. I think they're doing perfectly fine as a sort of new opposition party, working with the Constitutional Democratic Party, which is the main opposition. And they are still working with the LDP and Ishin, the ruling parties, on other bills. So there's a new working relationship, I think, that's slowly forming. So there's no real, I think, incentive to run back into the ruling coalition. When it comes to Ishin, that's, again, a big question going forward, given how the current Diet session is going. It's I think a painful process of trying to adjust to this new reality in which these two parties have never really worked together in an institutionalized setting. Now they've tried to institutionalize policymaking together, working in the Diet together. And there's been growing pains clearly in the way in which these bills have not really moved forward in the way in which I think both parties had planned them to go. But I think that at the moment, the Ishin's benefit is to be part of the ruling party, and to be rendered into the opposition parties again doesn't really benefit them at this point. So I think for the time being, it will stay.
And what other political events are you keeping an eye on for next year?
I think going back to Trump's visit to China in April, I think that will be a good indication of where Japan-China relations may go, given how Washington's support for Tokyo does seem to be weighed vis-a-vis that summit that will happen. China's response will probably vary depending on the outcome of that summit between the two leaders. So I think that's a key event that's coming up. I think the G7 summit in June is also tangentially related to that, going to impact how Japan-China relations go. We've already seen Beijing reaching out to France, the chair of G7, and also Germany, trying to have their support of their position on this current diplomatic spat with Tokyo. So clearly the G7 summit this year, especially if Xi Jinping is actually going to be invited and attend the G7 summit, that's another huge indicator of how things will go next year for Japan diplomatically. And then finally, I think there are two trilaterals that have not met this year. The US-Japan ROK with South Korea, and then Japan-China-Korea, which was suspended given the current diplomatic spat. Those two trilaterals are, I think, key to regional stability, given the players that are involved in both trilaterals. But the fact that they haven't met this year means that there's been a suspension of talks in terms of making progress on both sides, keeping the regional balance between the US and China and the middle powers that are Japan and Korea. So seeing whether that actually materializes next year, I think will also be interesting to see.
All right, all eyes on foreign diplomacy. Rintaro, thank you very much.
Thank you.